Don't you think it's strange that the best team in the world is doing something that's having a lot of success for them, and yet no one else seems to be copying it? Yes, today we're talking about G2, and we're talking about G2 forcing. Yes, my head is on Jogamo's head just here, but we're talking about G2 and forcing. Now, for those of you who don't know, who have never played Valorant, forcing is when in the second round, after you've lost the pistol round, you decide to buy up, where normally you would decide to save. But G2, since the start of Masters Bangkok, have been doing this pretty regularly. They have forced 13 out of 24 times when they've lost the attacking pistol round. Forcing, 54% of the time when they lost attacking pistol round is quite a lot, of course. They have won 7 out of 13 of those forces, which is also 54%. So generally, when they force, it's having a pretty good time for them. Now, the problem with forcing, of course, is if you lose, then your eco is in a bad spot again for the third round, so you have the chance of going 3-0 down and ending up in a really bad spot. But for G2, that actually happened only 3 out of 13 times, so only 23% of the time. That meant that in the other 3 occasions, basically they had lost their force round, but then they actually won on kind of the eco round on the third round. That means that overall, you get a kind of positive / neutral outcome around 77% of the time. Yeah, that seems like a pretty good idea. Also, they did force twice on defensive rounds as well, which is more rare, but we'll get to that later on in the video. And so overall, that meant that they won 9 out of 15 of their overall forces, 60% of the time. So they're winning 60% of the time when they do this, yet no one else is doing this. Well, why not? Well, the first thing probably a lot of people will tell you is that, well, G2 are just better than other teams. So, of course, they win more than, other teams would because they are just a better team straight up. And I think that that is probably pretty true. Another thing specific to G2 as well that people will say quite often is that G2 are very, very good with stingers. And they just so happen to be very good with the kind of most prominent gun that you're going to use whenever you force. And a lot of their team seems to be very good with this gun, and so they are able to make it work better than other teams can. But still, G2's numbers are very, very good, so you don't even necessarily have to be quite as good as G2 to be able to do this, right? Which, again, does bring up this pretty big question of why isn't anyone doing it? And today, I'm going to explain why more teams definitely should be doing it, and even why G2 themselves should be doing it a bit more. So let's run through some simulations of forcing, and we'll use here to start off with EG versus G2. You can see that EG have won the pistol. They've gone for a full buy. G2 in this round, this is one of the examples where they are going to force here against EG. And I'm going to explain now that forcing not just when you win, because obviously winning the force round, your opponent is now going to eco, you're potentially going to be able to build up your econ against, them having to save and whatever. It's going to be a good time if you win, right? Obviously. But even when you lose, there can be some advantages that you get, right? Like in this example of the EG versus G2 game, because this is a round that G2 lose. Okay, so this is one of the forces that they are going to lose in this instance, right? So we'll get to a point here in a second where it's Leaf in a 1v3, and Leaf is going to manage to get, this 1 kill here. So what that means is that EG win the round, but they only have 2 players left alive, right? And this can be important, right? Because what's going to happen in the next round is that G2 are coming in, not with a great buy, right? Like I said, they're going to have to, kind of eat it for 1 round. But if you take a look at EG's money now, 3 of their players, because you got those kills on them, are very low on money, right? So what happens in this instance is this is one of those instances where G2 managed to win the third round, right? But this has a bigger advantage for them because, of course, by forcing, they didn't give up a round. They actually end up winning, I think, a 2v5 in this round. But they didn't end up, obviously, just kind of giving EG the round. They made it close, they made it competitive, which meant that EG's money was still relatively low, which means that when they do manage to, come up with this eco round win, which of course will happen some of the time, maybe for G2, again, it will happen more than it will for other teams, but this kind of round will happen some of the time. Every team wins some ecos some of the time, right? So you end up in this spot. Well, what that means is that now when we come to the next round, you take a look at it now, and EG, they got nothing. Right, like they're in a really, really bad spot because we kept the rounds close, right? We never allowed EG to just like instantly build up their economy, right? So now as soon as we win a round, oh, we're in a good spot, right? So that means that now we're G2, we've got a chance against a big eco to build up our economy and be in a really good spot eco-wise. at a scoreline of 2-2. But it can go even deeper than that, because by forcing some of the time, you can actually gain an advantage when you don't force as well, right? Let's take a look at this game here, Sen versus G2, where again, this is an example where Sen have won the defensive pistol, so they of course have bought, but this is actually one of the rounds where G2 decided not to force. They didn't go for a force in this round. And the thing is, where this can get you a bit of an advantage is take a look at the buy that Sentinels have gone for, right? Because this is a very conservative buy, right? This is like everyone is buying because they think there is a possibility that G2 might force. But that means that even if Sen win this round, which actually they don't, but even if Sen manage to win this round, right, their buy isn't that great for the third round. And it also means that any kills that G2 get, right, any kills that they get is good for them, because it means that that's a player who won't have a gun for the bonus round, right? So even by just threatening to force some of the time, you can gain an advantage in that when you don't force, it means that your bonus rounds are more likely to convert. And I know that seems like a pretty like minute, you know, we're talking like small percentage points or whatever, but not losing that bonus round is very important to your chances of winning the game, right? Snowballing in Valorant is a big way in how a lot of maps are just lost, right? You lose the map in the first 6 rounds because you lost pistol, you lost bonus, you've had 2 ecos, you know, and it's before you know it, it's 6-0, and you're just obviously in a terrible spot in terms of actually being able to then win that map. Because one thing I don't think people maybe fully understand is just how often bonus rounds can be won, right? Let's take a look at this game, KC versus Na'Vi, where they showed this stat, right? The KC have the highest win rate of any playoffs team in bonus rounds. 55% of the time, they win their bonus rounds, okay? The EMEA Stage 1 average was 44%. The thing is, this 44% includes teams that aren't buying so aggressively, but Karmine Corp are an example, as you can see here with their buy. They're an example of a team, this is their bonus round. This is a very, you know, this is the aggressive version of the buy, right? Like where, oh my god, look at this round. Like if you just take a look at the economy of both teams here, you're going, well, we've got full rifles versus full rifles. This is just a 50-50. 50-50 where if Karmine Corp lose, they've still got money behind to buy afterwards, right? So if they lose, they're fine. But if Na'Vi lose, they're not fine, right? And a lot of the time, you will get these kind of bonus rounds whenever anyone does what is commonly known as an FPX buy. Now, for those of you who don't know what an FPX buy, basically it's this, that on the second round, you buy like this, right? So you've won the pistol round, and you buy super aggro, you buy 3 rifles like so, and you buy just 2 ghosts. This is again from that KC versus Na'Vi game, but this time Na'Vi doing it because Na'Vi, you know, were old FPX, basically the team that invented this, and they're still doing it, right? And Karmine Corp also do this, basically, and it's very aggressive, and what it means is that on the third round, when you come into your bonus round, you're gonna end up with this. Right, 5 full rifles versus 5 full rifles. This again is just a straight 50-50 round. And this is where G2 are not forcing enough. Because it is my opinion that in these situations, against any team that does an FPX buy and buys super aggressive for their bonus round, you should be defensive forcing against them. I mean, just think about it logically, right? If you think about the timeline here, when we sacrifice this second round, we are essentially saying, we're going to give you this round so that then we can play a 50-50. Where if we lose, so if you're Karmine Corp in this instance, if we lose, we're going to have to eco and, you know, surrender and basically go 4-0 down. But if we win and you lose, well, you've still got enough money to buy again for another 50-50. Right? So just think about the logic of that, right? In this second round, you are essentially saying, we're going to give you this one to play a 50-50 that if we lose, we're screwed, and if we win, you're also still fine. Well, that is not a very good trade deal. You might say that's the worst trade deal in history. Because that's the thing, when you look again at the second round buy and think about playing against this, right, and also take note, right, they're missing some utility here, right? This is not full util when they decide to go for this super aggro buy. So they're missing some util. Well, you're telling me that if you sting a force here, right, and you know, you do have enough money to stinger, force, get some util. You won't have full util, but you'll have some util. You're telling me that full stingers couldn't necessarily beat this, right? Because again, they're all on light shields, and for vandals and such, light shields doesn't really matter. But for guns like stingers and buckies that you would be buying in this sense for a defensive force, light shields do matter, okay? And so just think about it, right? Instead of just taking a 50-50 in round 3, well, why not just take what I would call this, if you forced here, a 50-50, why not just take it a round earlier? Right? Because not only are you taking the 50-50 a round earlier and not just giving them a round, you're not letting them build up your eco even if you do lose. And also, if you win, this is massive for you. Because you can then, if you win, you pick up 3 rifles. And so your economy is absolutely booming. So, why are G2 the only team that's forcing in Valorant? I couldn't tell you, to be honest. It just seems like a bit of a misstep by most teams, if I'm being honest. But I even think that G2 could be forcing, in certain circumstances, against teams that do like the FPX bound defense side, because I think logically, it just makes sense.